As he says, the title of this talk is the History of the Technical Achievements of Union Oil Company of California. Let me say a couple of words before I start. I will probably use the words Union Oil, Unocal, and we interchangeably, but it's all the same entity. Secondly, the ACS seemed to want historical paper rather than technical, but at the end, if you have technical questions, I will answer them. Thirdly, when I started the paper, I realized there were a lot of scientists and engineers who were involved in all this history. And if I named them all, it'd take a lot of time. And secondly, I'd be sure to leave somebody out. So I decided not to do that, except for one gentleman, Mr. Fred L. Hartley, who was so instrumental in the history of Unocal. So with that, I'll start the first slide, and I don't panic, I'm not going through this. I just wanted to point out, I guess this is set this way. The company was formed in 1890, and in keeping with the theme of this, they started a research lab in Santa Paula, California in 1891. They realized they had a wonderful potential product, but they had to do a lot of work in order to make it into saleable products. So they formed a little lab. I think it cost $2,500, and I'll talk a little more in a minute. Coming on down, here in 1901, Union Oil moved its headquarters to Los Angeles. That was an important step. Coming down to 1922, I should have marked these, new petroleum research lab that started at the LA refinery. That was a real step upward. And then in 1951, research lab at Brea, Orange County, California. And I see people in the room who have worked there. I mentioned Mr. Fred L. Hartley. 1964, he became president and chief executive officer. He had worked at the refinery in a high capacity and was transferred to the research department and actually became director of research, which was fortunate for us because that made him realize the importance of research. He came through the chain. Then I'll come down here to 1983. That's where the name Unocal came from, when a raider came after us and we had to incorporate and start fighting. 1990, we had 100 years. Recapitulating the labs for just a moment. 1891, Santa Paula, we just had a counter, glass bottles, test tubes, a burner, and a microscope, the minimum for studying this strange material. In 1922, we had small pilot plants, heavy on analytical test development because the standard tests were not in the text at that time. 1951, the Brea, California complex started, a wonderful place. They could duplicate any working problem in the field. This Friday at Brea, they're celebrating their 50th anniversary of the opening of that facility. Ultimately, there were 1,000 people there, and we named it Science and Technology, and then finally, as a vote to Mr. Hartley, we called it the Hartley Research Center. That pleased him. We told him we voted on it. He wanted to see the tally. This is a picture of that research facility taken many years ago. When it was built, it was out in the boonies, so to speak, and there was a rotating neon light around that 76. And at night, when the pilots came in, commercial pilots came in from San Francisco and Denver to Orange County Airport, that was a beacon. And as the houses built up, they complained about the flickering in their bedrooms at night, so it was shut off. Immediately, the commercial pilots complained. They had other means of navigation, of course, but it's nice to have a beacon that you can rely on. Union Oil Company of California was what we call an integrated oil company. We did all four of the functions: exploration, go out there and find it; production, pipeline; refining, and marketing. On chemicals, we had agricultural, that included fertilizers and crop protection, polymers, hot melts, lots of solvents. In the minerals, we were into molybdenum, niobium in Brazil, lanthanides in California, and for a while, uranium and coal. Many of the petroleum companies got into these other minerals, and I don't think anybody really succeeded. It was not our knitting. Here's Mr. Hartley. He's known as Mr. Union Oil. And there's the building in downtown Los Angeles that was built in 1958 and it dominated the skyline for years because it was on a hill, the only hill in Los Angeles, and there were no so-called skyscrapers. Later it was dwarfed by huge other buildings, and it lasted for about 30 years. This doesn't show up too well, but I want to talk a little bit about the evolution of the petroleum industry. Down here is Standard Oil Trust that was talked about earlier, and it was broken up into these, and gradually the blue lines came together, and they're still coming together, as you know. Who would have thought that Exxon and Mobil could come together 20 years ago? It wouldn't happen. They're Texaco and Chevron. But way up the top is Union Oil, one of the first. Not many blue lines at that time. In 1965, Pure Oil merged into that. And I only took this to 1990. If I took it on out, there'd be far fewer blue lines. Now in the 70s, as you remember, we had embargoes, prediction of shortages, and there were shortages, and there were lines at the pumps, so the public started screaming about monopoly. So Unocal put this together and ran it in various places. What a way to run a monopoly. There are 70 different companies, the largest one which has 9% of the nation's total oil and gas properties. Lots of bills were introduced to divest the petroleum companies in terms both vertically and horizontally. But after extensive investigations, no antitrust violations were found and no bills were passed. The public is still suspicious of us, but in fact, it happened again this year, as you know. Since Union Oil is a technical company, I just went and looked up some of the patents. 1985, they filed 105 patent applications. We had a great group of patent lawyers. 60 patents were ultimately granted. As you know, it takes a year to 5 years to get them. In these areas of refining, catalyst processes, technology, shale, herbicides, lubricants, carbon, solar, animal feed. In 1989, again, we kept the record up, 108 filed, 75 granted. So for a little company, it was indeed a technical company. I remember one year, Union Oil had sales of $12 billion. Exxon had profit of $12 billion. So that tells you what small potatoes we were. When I first started with a petroleum company, I thought, what's the simplest representation I can have of what happens in a refinery? You come in with the crude oil, you distill it. You get low boiling fractions, high boiling fractions. With the high boiling, you've got to decrease the molecular weight. With the low boiling, you have to increase it and then improve the properties, the hydrotreating, reforming, isomerization, and so forth. Well, Union Oil concentrated on hydrocracking and hydrotreating. We were into reforming a little bit, isomerization, but nothing serious. No company could do it all, so they tended to concentrate. Exxon came the closest. They were into everything because they had the desire and the money. So Union was heavy into refining catalyst technology. In the early 40s, our people, Unocal, Union Oil's people, were into low surface area metal oxides. Of course, they didn't last long. But later, we got into high surface area alumina, silica aluminas, impregnated with molybdenum, nickel, cobalt, and so forth. Those became more or less standard in the industry, and many companies were working on them, including the catalyst companies, and the universities did some fine work on elucidation and mechanisms and so on. I think I'll cover this right now. Union Oil actually licensed around 500 hydrotreating units around the world. I think it's considerably higher than that now. And in hydrocracking, we were the first to use Y zeolites and noble metals as catalysts. People predicted that those strongly acidic sites on the Y zeolites would simply absorb the nitrogen and be neutralized. But in fact, it handled it very nicely. They had very long lives. In 1989, Unocal hydrocrackers accounted for 60% of the world's licensed capacity, more than 130 units. I don't know what it is now, but that's a great success for a little small potatoes company. In the 1980s, Unocal, Unocal introduced 15 entirely new hydroprocessing catalysts, which shows you the effort that we're putting on it. To digress just a little, the funny, Union Oil kind of had a sense of humor. And out in some of the pumping units, we would make them look like grasshoppers just to attract people. And here was one of our more successful things. Every year down at the Los Angeles refinery would paint one of the big tanks as a jack-o'-lantern and have the kids come in their costumes and give them popcorn and candy and play games and so forth. And that was a great publicity event. I realized I couldn't cover everything that Unocal did, so I just picked out some things. Here was the use of a monopod up in Alaskan Inlet. As you know, the conditions up there with the fast tides and the ice makes it very dangerous. So with the monopod, you present the minimum surface and it lasts a lot longer. And with this one, they could drill 32 wells from the center. This was a good application of that technology. Now, Unocal was into geothermal, one of the companies that came with the pure oil. And in 1975, President Ford came and toured the Northern California. We call them the geysers. And we got along well with him. He and Mr. Hartley, they were teased that they looked alike, receding hairlines, both the same face. But he quickly grasped the importance of geothermal, and Unocal went on to develop the Salton Sea in Southern California and was big in the Philippines and in other Asian areas. Here was an interesting development. As you know, crude oil comes in with lots of sulfur in it in general, and it ends up as H2S, hydrogen sulfide. Later, it's reduced to sulfur, and it usually is powdered sulfur, and it presents a problem of dust pollution. Even explosions have been caused by it. So one of our scientists at Brea developed a technique for forcing the liquid sulfur through a gun with water, and the result was popcorn-shaped sulfur pellets, easy to handle, no dust at all, not flammable, and they had a very broad surface area for reaction with soil. The sulfur is good for not only acidifying the soil, but it's an essential element in all growing things. My color didn't turn out too well here, but here's a huge pile of popcorn sulfur. We'd make it all day long like that, and the trucks would come in and take it out into the farms. Now, ACS asked me to specifically talk about shale development because Union Oil was the first into it, one of the first. We stayed in it the longest, spent the most money, got hurt the worst, but nevertheless, it's history. In the 1920s, they began acquiring properties in Garfield County, Colorado, estimated that up to 6 billion barrels was recoverable if we had the technology. In the 40s, they did some work. In 55, we started the plant at Parachute, Colorado, 1,000 ton a day. It was successful, but it was shut down after proving. Then in the 70s, as you know, the things, as I mentioned, there were predictions of oil shortages, and the Arabian countries were getting angry at us, and eventually there were the 2 embargoes. So Unocal started building a plant. Well, they did a lot of retort B work, and then were authorized to build a 10,000 barrel per day plant at Parachute. It was a big deal. At one time, 1,700 people were working there. The plant started up, or construction was completed. It took about a year to start it up, and it was successful technically, but in the meantime, the price of petroleum was coming down, and we realized that it was not going to be viable economically. But we worked on it a few years and finally shipped Syncrude to Chicago. I'll mention what that is in a moment. But I mentioned Mr. Hartley. When he came in as head of the company, he felt he'd been given a legacy of reserves of petroleum, and that would be used up during his tenure. And he wanted to leave a legacy for whoever came after him, and he was sure it would be oil shale. Well, he went to his grave not realizing that, but on the other hand, it may come true yet. I just show this to show that the plant, the upgrading plant, was right against the mountain. this was a 5-acre plot carved out off the side of the hill so that the shale comes out of the mountain right into the plant. And let me show the retort here. We call this a uni-shale B retort. We love that word uni, unifying, uniforming, and so forth. Anyway, the raw shale comes in. It's been crushed to about 1.5 inches maximum. And there's a rock pump here, which sounds strange, but it's reciprocating with sliding plates. It pumps the rock upward. Hot retort gas comes in the top. And when it reaches about 1,000 degrees, the kerogen is released. And you have what we call shale oil. Then the rock, of course, the rock goes on up with the angle of repose, spills it, and it's handled. And down at the bottom there, you can see it can be taken out, and actually you can put plants on it, it grow grass and so forth. Anyway, crude shale oil comes out here. I guess there's nothing else particularly there, but I'll show the properties here of that shale oil as it comes out. Gravity of 22, boils anywhere from 150 to 1100. It's got high sulfur, high nitrogen, high oxygen. And here's a mean one here, arsenic at 50 parts. After it goes through we had a hydrotreater right on site, high pressure. Here's the raw shale oil. This is what we call synthetic crude oil. By the time it goes through there, you see the nitrogen, the sulfur, and oxygen are acceptable, and the arsenic's essentially down to nothing. And it compares very well with light Arabian, Mervyn, and crude. And this syncrude was what we shipped to Chicago refinery of Unocal, and they made very good fuels out of it. This demonstration produced 3 million barrels of shale oil. So technically, we have to say it was successful. Someday maybe it will be economically successful. I wanted to mention that back in the 70s, it's actually in the early 80s, the raiders were after the little oil companies, petroleum companies. It was a legitimate legal thing to go after companies. And Mr. Boone Pickens here from Mesa Petroleum went after Gulf, and as you know, he destroyed it. He tried to destroy Phillips, and he essentially destroyed Unocal in the sense that it never recovered. They won, but it was mortally wounded by a huge debt. And it mortally wounded Mr. Hartley too. He never really recovered after that. But that was a very unpleasant time in the industry. One of the last things I'll cover here is was controversial. When the federal government and California and other states were looking to get well, they were really dictating the pollutants out the tailpipe of motor vehicles. And the famous auto oil program was started where 14 petroleum companies, 3 automotive companies got together, had a program to look for the composition that would give minimum pollutants, CO, unburnt hydrocarbons, and nitrogen oxides. Well, Unocal joined that program, and it was a democracy, so even though we didn't agree with what they were doing, we went along with it and supported it. But at the same time, they started their own program, a broader program, and it was permitted under the rules. And indeed, they found a non-obvious gasoline formulation that burned cleaner and was so different that there was a patent issue, and I think it was 94 or 95. And immediately 6 major refiners sued Unocal, challenging the validity of the patent. Patent was upheld in the district court, circuit court, and by the Supreme Court. And Unocal offered to license this technology at a modest fee, meaning like 1 or 2 cents a gallon, as opposed to 5 or 6, which the court said they could choose. Just to show you how the tabloids work, this summer the price of fuel went up. They blamed it on Unocal because of these fees. There was nothing to that, but use whatever ammunition you got. I just put this up. Most of you know about gasoline, and it's a complicated mixture of hydrocarbons, various additives, which I won't go into. But here was the Unocal research parameters. That was the auto oil study. We included many more things, and indeed, we came to, I think, a better conclusion than they did. There were 5 patents issued on these reformulated gasolines, and here's a list of them if anybody wanted them. It's fairly technical, and it's actually very legal now, because just last week a major company sued Unocal again for acting improperly, which has been brought up before the courts before and properly mitigated. So it's now lawyer to lawyer and not scientist to scientist. So with that, I think I've used up my time, and I will stop unless you have some questions.
Any questions?